Moving across the world, we are now here with Dr. Sasha Goldstein-Sabbah, Assistant Professor of Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. Her recent book is titled Baghdadi Jewish Networks in the Age of Nationalism.
Dr. Sabbah interviewed Myriam Levain, who is based in France, but has begun to travel to Tunisia, her mother's family homeland, for the past few years. She's a journalist and founder of Stay Tunes on Instagram.
And please do put into the chat any questions or comments you may have, as we are monitoring them, and we'd love to hear them. And now let's hear from Sasha and Myriam.
Thank you for joining us. My name is Sasha Goldstein-Sabbah, and I am Assistant Professor of Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. And today we will be talking with Myriam Levain about the role of the legacy and memory of Jews whose families come from the Muslim world. And I'm sure it's going to be a fascinating conversation. So perhaps, Myriam, you can introduce yourself briefly.
Yes, hi. My name is Myriam Levain. I'm French. I live in Paris and I work as a journalist. I write about women daily, but I have a side project called Stay Tuned, which is about Tunisian Jews. So that's what brought me here today. When I have little time, I say I'm French, and when I have plenty of time, I explain where I come from, because it's a whole mix, like many Jews. So my father's family, Levain, was Levi. Levain was Levi. They were French Jews. We say Israelite in French. They were in France. They had been in France for many, many years. So that's my very French Jewish side, Levain. And my mom's family is from both Poland and Tunisia. But my grandfather, the Polish one, lost all his family in Poland. He was living in Brazil at this time. And when he married my Tunisian grandmother, they went to live in Brazil, and my mom was born in Brazil. And then they came to France when my mom was a kid. So that's very Jewish. But the thing is that my mom only had her Tunisian family when she grew up in France. So she grew up mainly in a Tunisian family, and that's my Tunisian heritage.
Obviously, both of these traditions are important. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about, growing up, how the Tunisian side was represented and how the French traditional Israelite side was represented as well.
Of course. So I was both close from my French side and my Tunisian side. I mean, my both grandmas, I was close to them, so I spoke a lot to them. It was easier to know about my French side because it was everywhere, especially in Paris. There is a strong Jewish history. There are museums, there are many things. So I was more familiar to my Ashkenazi history. But my Tunisian grandma was the only one she was the only one that could cook. So it was very important. So we ate Tunisian at every Jewish holidays. And she had remained Tunisian. So she spoke a lot about Tunisia, even if I understood later that it was very complicated for her, because she always said it was great, extraordinary, Tunisia, and blah, blah, blah. But I understood that she had made everything possible to leave Tunisia. So it was complex. And I think as in many families, we didn't really speak about the real issues. So she always said it was great and she was missing Tunisia and the food and the sun and the beach and stuff. But we never spoke about more dark issues, which I regret because now she died. But that's all of my projects and all of my searching, the roots searching.
Because you grew up in this more Ashkenazi kind of Reform Judaism in Paris, which is very specific and maybe even not part of the larger Jewish demographic, and yet you've also been, over time drawn to your Tunisian roots.
And you see my face also. I look very North African, and my name is Myriam, which is not a detail because it's a Muslim name also. It's a Jewish and Muslim name. So, what was interesting is that everybody thought I was Sephardic, 100%, everybody. And everybody thought I was Muslim most of the time. So I think that's also part of my history. Even if I was more in an Ashkenazi world, everybody thought I came from North Africa, which was true also because I have Tunisian roots, but people always think I'm from North Africa. So, of course, when you grow up like this, you start asking yourself questions and looking for your roots.
And when she took you there, did she speak Arabic? Or
yeah, so I discovered that because I didn't know my grandmother spoke Arabic because she never spoke Arabic in France. Since she had lived in Brazil and in the United States, I was used to hear her speak Portuguese, English, but Arabic never. So I discovered in Tunisia that when we went in the streets, in the markets and stuff, that she could speak Arabic. So I was kind of impressed. And with everybody was asking where we came from, because always the same thing. My name is Myriam. I look Arabic, and I was with her speaking Arabic. So they were like, who are they? It was fun. It was fun. But I started to realize the complexity of the Jewish history, but I was too young. And it took me many, many years after to understand the whole thing. And I think I will never understand everything, but that's another issue.
So, I mean, how do you feel in terms of the arc of Jewish history? I think actually you really represent everything when you talk about this.
Yeah, and I realized that very lately, I was like 35 when I realized that I was carrying a lot of Jewish history, and I said that as a joke in a broadcast that I represent all the Jewish traditions in France, because that very French Jewish tradition is also has a very strong history and about integration, a relationship to the Republic, and being a French citizen and being betrayed. I mean, it's also a heavy history. Now that I know more my Sephardic history, it's easier for me to say, okay, I'm French, but it's complicated. Let me explain. I was always said also that Jews and Muslims don't get along, which is not true, I think, but it's not easy to cope with that.
No. And it's complicated and personal, right? Because if someone speaks Arabic to you and then you respond and say, actually, I don't speak Arabic, I'm sorry.
But my name is Myriam, which is very Arabic. They don't get it. I think I spent like 15 years thinking about Jewish and Muslim relationship before I started thinking of my Sephardic heritage. I think it began like this. It began with me interested in how we live together, what do we have in common, what do we share, what makes us French, but different French people, but very close. And then I realized that I had my part of Arabic Jew heritage, but it was like taboo. And I know I can speak about that later.
Right. And actually, that's a common theme in France as well, is lots of people think that their grandparents were French citizens in Tunisia and Morocco. And of course, Algerian Jews were French. And then they do some research and they realize they weren't. And that's also part of the complicated relationship.
It was not always easy for them. That's what I wanted to say. Yeah. But they had that idea that Tunisia was a paradise, like, the lost paradise. The Sephardic, when they arrived in France in the 60s and the 50s and the 60s, they lived in the same places and the same buildings as Arabic people immigrating from North Africa.
As Muslims.
Muslims, yes. So I was like, okay, I love those stories. I've been working on them for 15 years. As a journalist, I was always very interested in those stories, but I never hear my story. I never hear the story of Sephardic people, and I think it's very rich, but I don't know exactly what. I was thinking about a documentary. I didn't know exactly, and I said, okay, the easiest, if I want to start now with a very easy tool, is my phone and only my phone. So Instagram is perfect because I spend a lot of time in Instagram. So it's going to be easy. I'm going to just to take some pictures and ask people how do they feel Tunisian Jews. And actually, I was thinking doing the interviews only in France. I was thinking I will do the interviews of Jews in France because I thought that in Tunisia, there were no more Jews. And I will take some nice, pretty pictures of synagogues in Tunisia and do the interviews in France. But I didn't realize what I was going to find in Tunisia, and that I was going to meet a lot of people in Tunisia, and that there was still a Jewish living community there. It's small, but it's living and very active. So it was fascinating for me. So that's how I left the first time for Tunisia. And I started the account Stay Tuned, which is a pun because Tun means Tunisian Jew. And then I was kind of overwhelmed because when I got there, I wasn't expecting that it could interest so many people in Tunisia, non-Jews, and the little community that is there. And so people were very curious. I had the Huffington Post Tunisia interviewing me because they thought it was really interesting to have that third generation coming back and stuff. So that's how it was like my first week. I had that interview. So I realized immediately that it was huge, and it was not only me, but something was happening. And that's why we are talking today. Like always, you think you are doing your little thing, and then you discover it's a bigger movement. And so it was really exciting for me to meet some people. I'm thinking about musicians, writers, filmmakers, food, like restaurant owners, and historians. People are doing things in many, many fields. And we are happy we have met in France because we can build events together, and it's starting to happen.
But it's almost as though you kind of started this personal journey because of your grandmother and also maybe a little bit your professional background. And then through it, you found a community who's making kind of Tunisian Jewish heritage live in the 21st century.
I think when I think about that, sometimes I get scared because it's too much. I have the feeling sometimes it's too much and time flies. And I'm not sure, maybe time flies against us because the eldest are not going to last forever. And so the Jewish community is getting smaller and smaller in Tunisia. And so the buildings, the synagogues, the cemeteries are, I'm afraid, I hope they won't disappear. So I think that's a very important stake now, that we do stuff to rebuild synagogues, to not abandon them. And so that's for the heritage side of the project. But what's my part as a journalist, as a French citizen, as a third generation kid, is how do we tell those stories? So, and as a journalist, of course, I want to tell the stories, and that's what I'm starting to do. And I hope I have more time and more possibilities to do that in the future. We need to tell the stories. How do we live with that heritage? What do we keep from that? What do we not keep from that? Because the world is changing. We are French or American or Israeli citizen. But we keep some tradition, and that's, for me, sometimes it's questioning, like, I'm a feminist journalist and I love non-feminist traditions, from the Sephardic world. So how do we live with everything? How do we cope with everything? I think we have to think about that. But for now, I think the emergency is that we write these stories, we take care about the monuments, we connect to each other, we connect different countries also, like Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, I guess Egypt also, and all the Mizrahim world, which is another story.
Thank you so much. Dr. Goldstein-Sabbah, are you here with us?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Yes.
I hear you perfectly, and we don't need the slide. Wrong slide. Take off the slide, please. Sorry. So thank you so much, Sasha, for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit why you thought it was important or why you participated in this?
Well, I think one of the really interesting things that's going on today is we can talk, obviously, about exile and dissolution of these communities, but it's also of interest to know what the younger generations think. And I think we're seeing today that especially the grandchildren of people who left the Arab world really want to rediscover this heritage, maybe because their grandparents are no longer with them, because they have friends who come from Muslim backgrounds and they're discovering that actually they have similar culinary traditions or family traditions. And I think that's another way to celebrate the history and culture of Jews from the Islamic world in the 21st century, and to look at how these traditions are actually preserved in the younger generation. So I was really happy to speak with Myriam because she's certainly one of the most dynamic people in this regard, but actually going to Tunisia and working to preserve this identity and this history.
Yeah, and I thank you again for bringing her to us today. And again, like you said, it's the third generation that still refines this need to connect. And I think we're finding that, and thanks to your research, people can. So thank you also to everything you do, and thank you for joining us.
It was a pleasure, as always.
Thanks. We'll see you soon.